There we go. Excellent. So welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. We're currently looking at a MyMathTest where we've just logged in. You'll see that it has a much more streamlined menu than you're used to, like from MyLabMath. If you've ever seen Math Excel, which is sort of like the original kind of behind the scenes software, it's very simplistic like this too. The student's only going to see announcements, take a test, if you wanted to use the study plan component, and their results. Obviously, we have some additional tools that we're looking at. So we're looking at the main screen that we have when we log in. If you've never used MyMathTest before, the first time you log in, you're just going to kind of have pretty much not a whole lot on the screen, and then you'll have a create or copy program option. So you can go ahead and click to create or copy a program. And you have, just like MyLab, you have the option to do a standard or coordinator, or if you had a coordinator course and you were copying it, you could then be a member of that course group. For today's example, we're just going to choose standard, but many schools, for the purposes of using something like MyMathTest, do create a template that other people copy, and so they do end up using a course group. So I'll just go ahead and name it demo for today, and we're going to create a new program. We have several test banks to choose from. Now you'll see a bunch of other stuff in here. Some of the things are Pearson server, but we have primarily 4 main test banks. Number 1, you have basic algebra through calculus. This is the one that's used the most because it covers the widest span. So for the people that are using this for placement testing and assessment of student skills, obviously this gives you the most variety. We do have developmental mathematics. We do have a math prep for elementary teachers. If you do want to find some materials, for example, for something more like QR or liberal arts math, this is a great resource. And then we have pre-calc and calc, which of course would go up more into multivariable calculus, some diff-EQ, that kind of thing. Even if you choose basic algebra, pre-calc, and calc, which is sort of the default bank, like MyLabMath, you can still pull questions from another test bank. So that's really a nice tool. So you can augment things that you're doing by pulling materials from another test bank if you need to. We then click to walk through kind of the setup of the program, the same thing that we would do with MyLabMath. It's very similar, except we call it a program instead of a course. You have the dates, the times, the time zone, date format, all of that kind of stuff if you want to allow other people to copy it. What access they're going to have. So if you are going to make a course group, what access do the other instructors have? By default, of course, it's section instructor. Do you want to edit, limit any other privileges? For now, we're going to skip that because we're not really worried about those right now. We do have the coverage page. So this obviously is useful if you're not going to be using certain things like higher level calculus. You can come up here and go ahead and delete some of these. So for example, maybe we don't go beyond integration and applications of that. So we're going to delete some of the higher level calc. Or perhaps flip side, we're not really looking at the lower end real number system, geometry, and measurement, so we can remove those. Whatever's easiest for you. You can also collapse, open the menus here and choose or, select or unselect particular topic areas. What this will do then, of course, is make sure that that material is available or not available if you don't choose it across your program as you're creating tests. Again, click next. If you wanted to use the lockdown browser, just like you could inside MyLabMath, that's available here. You could also use automated proctoring with ProctorU. That's a service that Pearson offers in conjunction with ProctorU. So ProctorU sets the test fee. They give you the key, the secret. They integrate with this, and what that means is a student would first have to authenticate with ProctorU before they could click to start their test inside MyMathTest. You can also restrict IP range. This is popular with campuses. Of course, prior to the pandemic, some schools have testing areas where they do placement testing, and so they could restrict the computer addresses to be only those labs, so students could only take the test in that lab. You can obviously also use proctored testing. There are other tools, as well for that. The learning aids here obviously are not for the purposes of placement testing, but should you decide to use the study plan tool in here for students, they do have learning aids just like they would in MyLabMath. Some schools are using this exclusively for placement purposes. Others are using it for, diagnostic purposes for different types of special programs. They're even using it for boot camps and remediation. So students do have a study plan tool. So we're going to go back to our program manager and we're going to choose the one that we just created. So here's today's demo. Keep scrolling here. And so now we're going to take a look at creating tests. So the process for creating tests, again, is very similar to MyLabMath if you've worked with that tool before. There are two types of testing in here, however, which is unique to this particular product. We do have adaptive testing and we have traditional fixed static testing. I'm going to walk through that one first. The adaptive testing is pretty cool. It does reduce testing fatigue. It does allow you to assess readiness for multiple levels. However, that is not going to speak smoothly to a student information system. So if you're talking large volumes of students, a lot of times people aren't very interested then in the adaptive testing simply because there's going to be a level of manual component there. Just an FYI, MyMathTest can be delivered in a what we call a direct integration environment with a learning management system. That does take some preparation time. In the meantime, most schools do use MyMathTest as a standalone product while that direct integration is being set up. So you could deliver this in Canvas or Blackboard, D2L, that kind of thing moving forward. So we're going to go ahead and click to create a test. And we'll just call it our demo test because we're so creative today. Now you can pick and choose questions just like you could with MyLabMath. Again, very similar. If you've used that product, you have access to all of these modules, topics, everything from, the real numbers up through some calculus. You can click on the chapter section and then objective. So you can drill down as far as you want to here. You can then choose questions in here. If you're going to, for example, allow a retest or you want to provide some more variety, you can actually pool questions. Makes it a little bit less likely that people would cheat or be able to kind of anticipate what questions they would see. And so you would just choose two with similar level of difficulty and pool them together. That's not necessary, but that's an option. One thing I would encourage you to note as you're working on these is that you would select questions as much as possible that are screen reader accessible, and you can even use that drop-down menu to choose that option. You'll see this little icon. That means, of course, that somebody that would need to use a screen reader such as JAWS or NVDA, similar tools, Read, Write, Gold, they would be able to use that successfully with this program and your test would be considered accessible. So it's nice to design it that way right up front. You also do have the ability to, as I said, toggle through here, choose other questions. You can also click change and select a different question bank. So for example, let's assume that we really wanted to have some questions from the kind of, liberal arts question bank, if you would. So we're going to go ahead and here and choose some prime and composite number questions just to augment. And I'm just going to show you how this looks when you add these here. The only thing that looks different is you'll see this little asterisk indicating that this was pulled from a different question bank. And you can choose to add up to 10 questions from other test banks. So not a lot, but it does give you some variety. The other thing you can do, should you find that you still don't have enough tests in here, enough questions, for your test, and you really want to add to that, you can choose to create your own questions. That can be done one of two ways. One, by editing existing Pearson questions, or two, creating your own from scratch. Some schools actually do create a mini test before the diagnostic that they're building, and it might just be 3 or 4 questions long to collect some demographic data and to introduce students how to use the tool. We do have some orientation questions here, as you can see, and they include things like how do I answer and enter questions, how do I, use the math palette, stuff like that. So those can be useful, and you can actually create a little pre-test if you wanted with those tools. For sake of example, at this point, I'm just going to go through here. I'm going to pick, everybody loves fractions, right? So I'm going to go through here and just add a couple more questions just for sake of our example here so that we have a couple of different objectives. So I would just continue to, build my test, pull my questions together, both from this test bank, other test banks as needed, jump through the different units, whatever I needed to do. And then once I have my test built, I'll be able to see estimated time here. If you choose questions that don't have metrics in front of them, this will simply say estimated time 6 minutes 45 seconds and have a little plus sign because there are some things that we can't anticipate, but this can give you a ballpark of approximately how long it might take some students. You can even, if you want to, click here on view question details. I'm just going to show you this page very quickly. For two reasons. Number one, you can modify numeric answer tolerance or percentage tolerance to applicable questions. Now, some questions that doesn't apply to, but others that would, and that might give a little bit of leeway for students as they're testing. You can also grant credit if you choose to for unsimplified answers. So if a student says 2x over 4y, you can choose to give them partial credit for that versus, completely marking the question wrong. That's up to you. But some schools have found that that's helpful, particularly when you're dealing with tolerance for, calculus-related questions, perhaps statistics, things like that, and or getting into the higher level maths, not penalizing students completely if they fail to simplify an answer. Again, your choice, but this can be a useful tool. We then go to the settings page, and again, if you've worked with MyLab, this looks pretty familiar. You can assign a due date. You can, put a password on if you do want to have this password protected testing. You can limit the number of attempts. So again, if you're using this as a diagnostic, a lot of times it's one. You may be granting somebody a second attempt. That's up to you. The settings, what happens if students are interrupted? If the server blips, something, their internet signal drops, something happens, power outage, whatever, do you want them to be able to re-access the test with or without your approval? Most faculty find that it can get kind of frustrating if you have large numbers of students and there is a power outage or a server interruption that they have to manually allow every student back into the test. They find that's a little time consuming and frustrating. The default is what a lot of people are using, but again, there are some other options here for how to handle incomplete attempts. Should you want to have a test time limit and have that show, you can add that here. You can say you have 90 minutes to take this. Show me the little timer. We do recommend, if you'd like to scramble the question order, that gives, again, a little more variety to the order of the questions. It mitigates some risk of cheating. So if you're pooling questions, you're scrambling questions, most of the questions in here are algorithmic, meaning people are getting different numbers, different questions in different orders. It makes it a lot harder to kind of anticipate the next question. You have different ways to control the results. So here, the test summary would show the test score and question results. You could just show them their score. You could hide it completely from students. That's up to you. Again, do you want them to be able to review the test or never be able to review the test for test security? Some schools choose that. Some will say you can review the test, but only after everybody has taken this diagnostic. Again, that depends on how this is being used, the time frame, for what purposes. So some schools choose to hide the test results and never let students review it because it's a diagnostic placement and they don't want information about it getting out to other students. That's up to you. There is a test summary message, so you can customize the message that students would receive when they are done testing. Should you have more than one test, like for example, let's say you have a college algebra one, and then you had a calculus one, or perhaps you're testing two content areas, you're testing liberal arts, you're testing STEM, you can simply say, congratulations, you finished the test, on to the next test, whatever you'd want to do. So you can customize that, and then you can click Save and Assign. And of course, if you fill that box, if you check that, you have to put a time limit in. We'll just let that go for now. And we would go ahead and assign it, and you would now see that we have a test created. The adaptive test setup is a little bit different. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this one up too. So here we can use preloaded course associations. These are mapped by subject matter experts, or you can create your own. Kind of up to you, whichever's most convenient. If you want to use the preloaded ones and then, do some modifications, you want to build from scratch, whatever's easier for you. I'm going to go ahead and keep these 3 right now, or 4. I'm going to click OK. So you can see here that there's some preloaded expected prerequisite knowledge. So for you to be successful in an introductory algebra course, we would expect that you'd be able to work with materials from like the real number system, your basic pre-algebra. For you to be successful in intermediate algebra, here are the prerequisites. For you to be successful in college algebra, or trig, or pre-calc, we would expect that you would know fundamental concepts of algebra, so forth. You can change all of these by editing these or creating your own associations. But again, this is expected prerequisite knowledge. Then you choose what is the minimum level of readiness that is acceptable to you. By default, you'll notice here it's set at 60. Most schools put it to at least 70, 75, or maybe all the way up to 80. What this is saying is, you're telling the system, Diane Hollister is ready to take calculus if she has mastered 80% of the material in this particular pool of objectives. If I don't master at least 80% of the material that's given to me from this pool, then I'm not ready for calculus. I'm going to be assessed on all 4 of these areas, and each one of them will give me a readiness score. So these kind of are sequential, obviously. We're working up into more difficult material, but sometimes some departments want to have kind of side-by-side assessments, if you will, comparable levels, like is a student ready for STEM? Is a student ready for liberal arts? Is a student ready for statistics? And so you'll see a readiness score for different areas. So it's very different from having a fixed test where everybody has the same questions, everybody has the same objectives, and you score 75% and we all understand what that means. Here, what you are doing is identifying what's the content that the system can pull questions from, and then you do not know exactly what objective students are going to get. Everybody gets a different test and different questions based upon how they're performing. Within 6 to 10 questions, the system will determine whether the student is ready for that particular level. So you would be able to assess 4 levels or 4 different content areas with a maximum of 40 questions. So it definitely reduces testing fatigue. They've gotten a lot more precise with this over time as they've refined the engine. However, again, the caveat is you cannot control that everybody gets the exact same objectives. If there's some specific materials that you want to know how students perform, then we probably would tell you to not use the adaptive testing or to use some combination so that you can get those results that you're looking for. Once this material is chosen, again, you do your test settings. They look very similar to the other page. Here, you're just going to get either you can see your readiness and test scores or you can hide them. By default, they're hidden. Again, you can have a test summary message. Thank you for finishing the test. Talk to your advisor, whatever, and then click Save and Assign. Okay, so then we want to say, what does this look like on the results side? So in other words, like what does a grade book look like when we start getting results? So I'm going to jump to a grade book here. I just paused the page for a second just so you're not seeing everything jump around and getting kind of dizzy. So we're going to jump into a grade book, and this has some falsified student names in here, but you will see some, actual results. So you can see, for example, just like you might be already familiar with here, that you would see item analyses for a particular test. So you can click your item analysis. You can take a look at how did my students do on these particular objectives, how many had it right, how many had it wrong, how many had partial credit, how many skipped it. I can see that information. I can scroll down and click on a particular student's name, and I can click into how they did. So for example, I can scroll down and say, okay, let me see how this student Ansel did, what the score was, that kind of thing. Now, those are for your traditional static test. You had a 75, you had an 84, you scored this on algebra, you scored this on college algebra. Let's look at readiness. This is the adaptive testing. The results look a little bit different. They're kind of fun to look at, but obviously there's a little bit of interpretation that needs to occur. So in this particular case, you can see here, I'm sorry, my dog's deciding to have a little dream right now and is having a little rabbit chasing school. Stop.
My wife and I have a spaniel that does that.
Like she has to lay right by my desk while I'm recording a training. So at least it's amusing to you all. So here we look at readiness results. So the student, Jason, has mastered the material to be placed into introductory algebra based on basic math topics, pre-algebra topics. Intermediate algebra, he made it to, just kind of over the border. For college algebra, he wouldn't be ready. Here's a student who had not ready across the board, didn't do very well. Here's a student who did well on the lower level, didn't do well on the upper level stuff. And again, these are some just made up names in different testing. And so let's scroll down. This sometimes happens where you have a student who does not meet qualifications for one test here, but then maybe the next test up, they do make it over the border. So in this particular case, you would probably recommend placement into this course, even though here they might have missed some fractions and they need some review. Again, this is where the readiness scores and the adaptive testing, you have to have some rules in place or some interpretation going on. Some schools do have these scores exported to Excel spreadsheets and some formulas in place to determine what's appropriate placement. Again, it's a great tool, but if you're talking a lot of students, you would not want to manually handle these results. But these are readiness scores, and then you would make a recommendation based on those readiness scores as to where students should be placed. And that's very different from your traditional, like, here's your test, you had a 75% or a 56% or an 82%, and you know, I can see specifically which objectives you've completed. Should you want to use the study plan for some remediation or practice, I'm just going to toggle back into your program here. Give me a second. Apologize for that. Since the other one was my preloaded demo gradebook. Should you want to go to the study plan and let students use some of that for remediation purposes or practice, or perhaps even a boot camp environment, you can click the study plan manager and you can choose to modify the mastery level. Typically, we set this at 80%, meaning that if a student scores above 80% on a particular objective, we're saying, you know what you're doing. Some schools have that a little higher, some set that a little lower, but usually it's around 80%. You can also choose what material students would see. So we can click to edit the coverage and scoring. Now again, if you recall, at the higher level here, we had already removed some sections at the program level. We don't see the multivariable calculus or differential equations, but we could also come in here, click into here, literally even click into a section and say, okay, I'm only going to, you know, I'm not going to let students see this particular question or this particular question, or I'm only going to show them half as many, or I'm not going to show a particular objective, whatever your criteria is, and then you can click Save Coverage. So again, you probably would not be coming back to selecting the coverage and editing that unless you are going to have students be using this as part of a boot camp or remediation tool. But again, knowing that you do have the ability to go in there and modify, notice now we've removed 2 questions. So, you know, should you want to use this, you can remove sections, you can remove objectives, you can remove particular questions so that students literally do not see 884 objectives, but maybe you're really focusing on 300 objectives or 200 objectives for practice purposes. And again, you do have the ability to post an announcement. If you have students enrolled in here, maybe you're using it as a boot camp, you could post an announcement, email it to them, they have access to those materials, etc. A couple other things that some of which are similar and some of which are unique. You do have individual student settings. So you can, for example, if you have a student with disabilities, you know, with a disability, you can provide them with extended testing time. You can make settings just for them. You do also have the ability to, you know, batch change due dates and so forth. So if you have a series of tests, a sequence of tests that students are taking, You can change due dates, assign status, whatever, very quickly. Another thing that you have over here, which is kind of interesting, is that you can set prerequisites just like you can in MyLab. But here, it may be that you want to do this because you don't want students to do a particular test till they've done another one first. So for example, they can say, okay, you can't do the second one until you've done this first test. That's forcing students, for example, to start off at a certain level and then work through the second one, third one, whatever. You can also group tests together. So for example, I worked with a university that had a STEM and non-STEM placement option. And so they grouped tests together. So if you signed up for the non-STEM option, you got a sequence of tests. You signed up for the STEM option, you had a different sequence of tests. So that allows you some flexibility in how the tests are delivered to students, but it also can force students to not, to take certain tests and not miss certain ones. If you just have a list of tests, it's possible they don't click and take the ones you want them to. So you do have the ability to group or ungroup tests here. You'll notice here I can click to group these. Then there'll be, this is group 1, and then I might have a group 2 for a different batch of students. Some schools even just do that for, again, variety, to reduce the risk of cheating. So they have 2 different groups of tests, which are similar, but again, just kind of giving students the idea, oh, hey, I was group 1, you're group 2, like I'm in a different batch of tests. Things came in a different order, a little harder to sort of share it out. The other thing that is sort of special and unique here, you do have what we call managed course recommendations, which is obviously because this is testing. So should you want to use static testing, your fixed tests, and you want to provide placement. So for example, let's say we could say you place into calculus, right? And so here are the rules to place into calculus. You need to take, and again, this is just a demo, so we're just going to, make an example here. We're going to say, if you take my demo test and you score above a 75%, you can place into calculus. And you could say another test, you have to score above a 75 here and an 80 here. Or I could give an alternative. Or if you took, I don't know, and obviously I'd have to have a separate test here. So I could say, or take this other test and score above an 80, and then you could take calculus. So I can create automated placement, and then students even get an email with the placement results. I can have that show on their test results page, and then I can add a course recommendation. So based upon performance on this test, students would see an automated placement message. That can then show in the grade book, that shows on the results page. If they're going to meet with an advisor, come talk to to an instructor, everything's accessible for them. And you can actually modify, again, this test template. So a student email address would be automated. You can actually have this come from a certain department, server, admissions, placement, whatever email you want. Have that set so it's blind copied. Here's your results, and then there'll be first name, last name, email address, here are your scores, here's your course recommendation, and then you can click to save the template. And that can be customized, so you can choose what students are going to see when they're done. In addition to seeing their automated placement, you may want to provide them with a message, please talk to your advisor, blah, 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 blah. Or before you talk to your advisor, go ahead and work in your study plan, whatever workflow you're going to use. You do, again, as in MyLab, have the option to export data. So this includes both quick and advanced exports. I highly recommend that there is a process in place to do this at some sort of schedule, whether it's every semester or it's after a certain batch of students are tested, whatever it is. The quick export literally takes 30 seconds, super fast. You can just do student readiness scores or item analysis, whatever. The advanced would be a little more involved if you actually are using the study plan, you want some results by unit. But again, the whole purpose is that you would export and save this. It's good documentation. It's also helpful should you make some changes to your program. You can go back and review student metrics just as a frame of reference. So again, just quick overview there, but let me stop. I've talked for a while here, and I'm sure you have some questions. I'm trying to give you some of the highlights here. So again, we're going to go back to our, oops, I tried to click on tests and I took you too far back there. Going to go back to our testing page. But let me go ahead and pause there and ask if there are questions.
I know I will have questions, but not until I played with it.
Right. I mean, in many cases, that is the case. You know, you want a little time to get in there and tinker with it and, you know, kind of work with settings. If you're going to use the adaptive at all, even if you're using the fixed, obviously you can then go to the student side once you've done these setups and then go ahead and take the test, get the experience, see what it feels like. If you're going to use the adaptive, I usually recommend that you take the adaptive test more than once. Take it as a high performing student, answer those questions, you know, work hard, get a lot of right answers, and then take it as a weaker student so you can kind of see how the system responds. It is making use of item response theory to track student performance and make recommendations as to the likelihood of you're getting the next question correct, the likelihood of you're doing okay with these particular objectives, and then, you know, gear students up or down based on their performance. But it will assess student readiness for each of the content levels you choose. This is different. Sometimes I have faculty ask, so I'm just going to go ahead and say this, you know, how does this compare to, there's a competitor's product that some people use for placement purposes that has a pie in it and it shows student performance. That's based on knowledge space, which is a different mapping, you know, psychometrics. So it works a little bit differently. You know, the result is that obviously we're looking for the same thing. Where are students mastering material and where are they not mastering material? I do have more specifics about the computerized adaptive testing engine if you needed them. I also have more information about the differences between adaptive and fixed testing and kind of some nuances in the system with that. But again, some of the best ways to kind of experience that is to actually create the tests and take them.
Well, I want to say right away, thank you very much for working through this with us. I see a lot of things that I think could be cool and that could really be useful for us. But again, you know, like you said, you know, let's play with it and see what it goes like. I know for one, I would be interested in seeing some of the statistics in the background of the analytic tests and, you know, how that compares with other like AccuPlacer and see how the comparisons work with score bases. I don't know if you have that.
I don't really have a lot. We don't really have a lot of that. I can give you information about how the testing engine works. We call it the CAT, the computerized adaptive testing. I can give you information about the CAT, and I can give you information, obviously, about item response theory and the setup of the program.
Right.
This is not nationally normed like AccuPlacer is. So schools build their own tests and kind of norm their own reference ranges, if that makes sense. A lot of times they might use both fixed and adaptive testing to kind of find those sweet spots for their cutoff scores, depending upon how they want to utilize it. Some schools will trial this aside of AccuPlacer and kind of compare the results, but this is not nationally normed, so we really don't have, like, I often have people say, can you give me the cut scores? Like, where do people do cutoffs for, you know, college algebra or calculus? We don't really have that. I can make you some generalized recommendations based on what I've seen other schools do, but because everybody builds their own assessments, it's
Right.
unique.
So is this just a standalone, or can it be pulled? Because we've talked about a couple different things, you know, for placement, or we were also talking about when the semester started, because we didn't have placement, we were basing it off transcripts and other things to give like a first day test. Is that something we can pull into our MyMathLab course and have them take it if we have a standardized test, or is it's a standalone thing?
It is still a standalone product. I do apologize about that. We've had a lot of people ask that. I would love that. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, this can just be pulled right into my math lab. Having said that, I have had people that built diagnostics in my lab math. You know, instead of using this tool, they build a test in my lab math as a diagnostic. First thing students do is take that test. But if you wanted to use this product as it is standalone, students can use the same Pearson credentials. Like, so if they already have a Pearson account, they can just log into this with the same Pearson credentials and enter a pass, you know, the access code if that's how it's being done. Or as I indicated, it could be something directly embedded and delivered in an LMS.
Okay.
Like
And
in my, no, go ahead, sorry.
Are most questions have screen reader capability? Because that's something that we're running into. We just want to make sure.
A lot of the questions in the system do. I don't have the exact percentage. It is roughly 90% of the questions in the system that are screen reader accessible, give or take a slightly in there, but the last percentage I was given was like 90.2. So there are some older questions in the system that have not been converted to HTML5, which means they are not, or the alt text hasn't been modified, that kind of thing. But you can use that filter that shows, give me screen reader accessible questions only, so that you don't accidentally use ones that aren't. The other option is, of course, to create your own test question if there's something that you feel is not sufficiently covered and you can't find one. Here's the caveat with using the adaptive engine. I'm going to tell you right now up front, the adaptive engine pulls from the entire question bank. As of now, I've requested several times with the product team and explained to them the importance of having it map only accessible questions. At this point, they haven't added that filter yet. So if you wanted to be 100% compliant, you could not use the adaptive testing.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
And when they are, when we're doing the compliant ones, is it just JAWS and NVDA that it's compliant with, or are they compliant with other systems if students have other software or whatnot?
We primarily, JAWS is the industry standard. So most of the others, if JAWS works, they work. I'm not an accessibility guru, so I'm going to give you that caveat. I do work with the accessibility team. They do test other ones. They do work. I just worked with a school this week what's it with a K? I can't think of it now. Not Cozier's, Coros. I apologize, I don't remember. So that was a new one to me. We built a demo. That school was testing with it. It was a product that the student had, but typically JAWS is the industry standard, so we are compliant with JAWS. That is what our teams use to test. They do also test NVDA sometimes, but JAWS tends to be the really rigorous one. So, that's kind of what we recommend. But they do, I know that they've talked about Read Write Gold. I know that they've talked about the NVDA, JAWS. There's been 2 or 3 others that I've heard that team mention. But like I said, the JAWS is the standard. So my experience is when it works with JAWS, the other ones work. They may not have as many bells and whistles as JAWS has, because JAWS is a pretty expensive, comprehensive program. So.
Right. Now, I just asked because we're having some issues with MyMathLab and other softwares within MyMathLab. So I just didn't know if those same issues would exist here. That's all.
I'm not sure. I really would not want to give you misinformation on that. Certainly if there's an issue going on with accessibility, definitely reach out. We have an email at disability, access, disabilities@pearson.com. We also, your rep can get in touch with that department. I'll be happy to forward something if, Jennifer can't. But I think we definitely, that team can dig into that and respond to you for that. Sometimes we do run into issues if someone makes, for example, a custom question and they didn't make the alt text correct. We can run into problems with that. I know, like I said, if someone used the adaptive engine in here, they definitely are potentially at risk of having a problem, because roughly it's a little bit under 10%, but 10%, we'll just make it round off. 10% of the questions are potentially not compliant. So you don't want to use the system that would run that risk. But again, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Technology is constantly changing, so.
Of course. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Shannon. But definitely, if you're running into problems, reach out and we can get my colleagues, Doug, Jonathan, somebody on that team to take a look at what's going on and give you some feedback.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions, thoughts? Again, if you have MyMathLab access, you should automatically be able to sign into MyMathTest. So you simply go to mymathtest.com, log in with your Pearson credentials.
Okay.
You can create a test, create a program, tinker around, play with the settings, that kind of stuff. We do actually have I don't know if you might have seen this as I was scrolling past, but we do actually have a program that has next gen like tests. We cannot say that they are next gen tests. Obviously, this is not the College Board, but they're basically material that's been curated to align topically with the AccuPlacer. So by content area, they're roughly approximating the same material coverage. So we do have that. You can copy that if you'd like. You can tinker around with building it from scratch, whatever works best for you. Like I said, for compliance purposes right now, I would avoid the accessibility or avoid the adaptive testing because of accessibility issues. It's still fun to look at and explore, and hopefully soon they'll have the filter in place that we can check the box off and say, please only use screen reader accessible questions. The primary issue, like you can anticipate, is some of the older programmed graphing questions.
Well, thank you very much. And once we've had time to play with it for a while, would we be able to, like, if we wanted to schedule like a more advanced training, or if we needed more work like that?
Absolutely. You can always reach out and ask for some more information. At this point, you've got a lot of the nuts and bolts here. After you've kind of dug in a little bit, and you may want to look at, do we want to have sequential placement things? Do I want to integrate? Jennifer can request a direct integration shell to put it directly into your LMS, things like that. We can definitely touch base again and kind of have that tier 2 discussion when you're ready for it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If there aren't any other questions right now, what I will do is stop the recording. I'm going to